Okay, so this is my social stratifications assignment, test, quiz, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to start with race and ethnicity. Race and ethnicity, I cannot speak, is more than just color. It goes beneath the skin. Race is used to categorize people who share biological traits that society think are important. Like on Ancestry.com, even if you are 1% African American, it is enough to classify someone as black rather than white. An ethnic group is a group that has a shared cultural heritage. And the U.S. uses 6 different categories of race: white, black or African American, American Indian or Alaskan, Native, I cannot speak. White, black or African American, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, and last but not least, they always have that one other box that says some other race. Race is a social construct. Ethnicity describes a shared culture and national origin. Minority groups are defined by the lack of power they receive. Minorities are singled out and they receive unequal treatment. People can, stereotypes can be based on things like race, ethnicity, age, gender, and sexual orientation. And prejudice is what refers to beliefs, thoughts, feelings, or attitudes that someone holds about a group. Like, I do community theater, so I could have prejudice against someone else who's new. I've been doing theater for like 10 years, so I could get really mad and have prejudice against them because they came in and they got the lead role and I didn't, even though I've been there longer. Racism is a stronger type of prejudice. It's used to believe that one racial category is superior or inferior to others. Example is the KKK. Colorism is that one skin tone is better than another. An example would be like whites think they're better than Muslims just because Muslims have darker skin, so they think that all Muslims are terrorists. Discrimination is actions against a group of people. Racial steering is when real estate agents direct homeowners toward or away certain hoods based on race. Conflict theorists look at power and the struggle between racial and ethnic groups. Interactionists see race and ethnicity as sources of identity and social symbolism. And everybody is subject to stereotypes. Genocide is the deliberate killing of a large group of people. World War II explains that. And then expulsion is a group being forced to leave a certain area or country. And then segregation is a physical separation of two groups. Examples, and a popular example, whites at the front of the bus, blacks at the back. And then the textbook had a really good definition or like metaphor symbolism for pluralism, which they called it a salad bowl, which I thought was really cool. And it said it was a great mix of culture where each group adds its own flavor. Assimilation is a process in which a group gives up its identity by taking on characteristics of the dominant culture. The U.S., people don't really know that the U.S. history, many of the people come from different backgrounds. Like the indigenous people were the first to habitat these lands. Most racial and ethnic groups have experienced various levels of prejudice and discrimination because of what they have gone through. Okay, so now we're going to move on to gender, sex, and sexuality. Sex refers to the physical or psychological differences between males, or females, including both primary and secondary sex characteristics. Gender refers to the behaviors, personal traits, and social positions that society attributes to being male or female. Sexual orientation is his or her physical, mental, emotional, and sexual attraction to a particular partner. And just so you know, I wrote all my notes down to read them, so If you see me not looking at the camera, it's because I'm looking at my notes. Within that, though, going back, within that, they are divided into 4 categories. Heterosexuality, which is the attraction of the opposite sex. Homosexuality, whichever, you're attracted to the same sex. Bisexuality, you're attracted to either sex, like it doesn't matter. And then there's asexuality, which is attraction to no sex. The United States is a heteronormative society, meaning it assumes sexual orientation. Gender role refers to society's concepts of how men and women are supposed to look and behave. Like me, because I'm a woman, I'm supposed to dress in skirts, and like if I was to go to a business dinner, like I'm supposed to dress nice and formal instead of maybe wearing a suit and a tie. Gender identity is personal internal perception of his or her gender. Transgender people identify with a role that is different from their biological sex. Trans people who put their bodies through medical interventions, such as when you go through the sexual reassignment surgery or you take hormones, they do that so their physical being is better aligned with how they, with what gender they identify as. Moving on to like what stratification is, there's a long history of stratification, especially for women. The textbook, I'm going to list some examples from the textbook, which were: before 1809, women could not execute a will. Before 1840, women couldn't control or own their own property. Before 1920, women couldn't vote. Before 1963, women didn't get paid the same as men. And before 1973, women had no right to legal abortion. And then another thing that the textbook listed was called Doing Gender, and I really liked it. It was the performance of tasks based upon gender assigned to us by society. And then social construction of society is a socially created definition about the cultural appropriateness of sex-linked behavior. When sociologists study sex and sexuality, they focus their attention on sexual attitudes and practices and not on physiology, psychology. I don't know how to pronounce some of these words that I wrote. Like I do, but I don't. And so we'll just skip that. And norms regarding gender and sexuality vary across different cultures. In general, the U.S. tends to be a sort of conservative in its sexual attitudes. And so as a result of that, anyone who's different, like anyone who's different than a heterosexual, which is the norm, a man and a woman, gets judged more harshly, which that's so unfair. Just because they're different doesn't mean that we should judge them because of who they are. And then moving on to social stratification and like poverty, stuff like that. It refers to society's categorization of its people into ranking of tiers based on many factors like wealth, income, race, education, and power. Exogamous marriages is when people marry from different social categories. Like I'm a middle class. If I married a rich man, that'd be, yeah. Or endogamous unions, which is the most popular, is people marry from the same social category. And then as far as social categories, everyone knows there's upper, middle, and lower class. Social mobility talks about a shift from one social class to another. And then class traits are also called class markers, and they're typical behaviors, customs, and norms that define each class. Like me being from a middle class family, like I wouldn't go out and buy a fancy sports car, but for someone from the upper class might. Global stratification compares the wealth, economic stability, status, and power of countries as a whole. By comparing income and productivity between nations, researchers can better identify global inequalities. And then The book also had listed something that I'd never heard of called the Dave Moore thesis, which argues that the greater functional importance of a social role, the greater must be the reward. And then the last chapter in that talked about the functionalist perspective and how it states that systems in society exist for good, for a good reason. And then the conflict theorist observes stratification and promotes inequality. And then symbolic interactionists look at micro-level perspective of stratifications, and they observe how social standing affects people's everyday interactions and how the concept of social class is constructed and maintained through everyday interactions. So, that's it. Try not to make my video as long as it was last time. I know it's still really awkward. And I also think I'm still wearing the same thing I was last time. But it's okay. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.